thank you. If you follow me on Instagram or Facebook, you'll know that I have a little segment that says it could only happen to Ali. And that has just happened because I've just dropped water all down my lap. So if I'm standing here and my jeans are wet, it's because I've dropped water over my lap. First of all, I just want to say, how was worship this morning? It was amazing. And it was such a blessing for us because I was putting the worship team together, the rota together, and we had no lead instrument. We had hardly anyone that was around today, but Matt contacted the whole Cult Heart family, and we ended up with a whole family, including Hudson on the guitar. Wasn't he amazing? Hudson was so good. And this morning was amazing. Worship was amazing. And there is still more to come. So we are continuing our series, which is the Unsung Heroes of the Bible. These are they're not little people, but they're littler stories of people that perhaps wouldn't be known about, or maybe we know of them, but not in very specific contexts, and I'll come back to that in a second. The person that I've been given is Rahab. So when I first got given Rahab, I was like, oh, okay, great. But actually, there was so much that I learned when looking through Rahab and studying Rahab that was amazing. And I just want to speak around the area of forgiveness. And if as soon as I drop that word out of my mouth, you were like, oh, here we go, that means that you need to deal with some forgiveness in your life and your heart. I struggle with forgiveness. I'm not going to lie. I'll put my hands up. I do struggle with forgiveness. It's something that I have to practice continually. And even yesterday, oh my goodness, no, that's absolutely fine. I forgive you. Even yesterday, I had to practice the art of forgiveness, and I totally wasn't expecting to have to, because yesterday it was my birthday. I left a little pause there for everyone who didn't remember. I forgive you. No, I'm joking. But I got a card from my best friend, who is Hannah, and this card was really lovely, and it said, like, you're the best friend, or something like that. We were going to bring it this morning, but she forgot it. I've forgiven her again for that, because I forgot it too. But it said, you're my best friend, and then it had like a 5-star rating. She saw 5 stars. There was 4 stars marked. So I look at this card, and Hannah's like, look at the words, look at the words, look at the words. And I was like, yeah, but there's 4 out of 5 stars. So then I start reading the words, and it's like, oh, you're fun to be around. Life's an adventure. I can always rely on you. And then the words come, for the most part, as if you write for the most part on a birthday card. So then I call out, and I'm like, Han, what's going on here? And she's like, it's all right, I can draw it in. Draw it in. I think that's even worse. They're receiving the 4, but the truth is she didn't even see it. So and I use this illustration because there is no weight, really. It's just a funny illustration, but I had to practice forgiveness in that moment. Has anyone heard of Rahab before? Put your hands up. Yep, majority of people. Okay, so to give you a bit of a pre-context for those that haven't, I always like to try and give a pre-context in the Ali version. Which is that Rahab is mentioned in Joshua 2 and Joshua 6. She's also mentioned in other parts of the Bible. I've just been put off by something, sorry. So Moses has led the Israelites out of slavery in Egypt. So they've crossed the Red Sea. They've been stuck in the wilderness, and they're moaning and moaning and moaning for 40 years. You might have heard about this. And they are en route to the Promised Land. And the Promised Land connects Rahab to this part of the story. So Jericho was the first part of the Promised Land that these guys were heading into. Moses has died, and he doesn't get to see the promised land, unfortunately. But the baton has been passed down to Joshua to then take the Israelites into the promised land. So he's got a big job for his first job. Imagine you've just 40 years spent people moaning and moaning and moaning, and then you're like, right, now you are the one. And he's there like, oh my goodness. And Joshua's first battle is to take Jericho. Now, in the Bible, we hear about Jericho. You may have heard it, about the walls falling down with those that are blasting the trumpets. We'll come back to that in a minute. But if we look at Jericho here, Jericho is a two-walled city. Now, this is according to archaeologists. And Rahab would have lived in the outer wall. So she wouldn't have been part of this inner city. She would have lived in the outer wall. And the wall surrounded the city, but if there was a breach to the wall, then the reality is she would have been the first to die. Or she would have been the first to be attacked because she lived on that outer wall. But there was a reason why she was put on that outer wall, because she was a prostitute. So she wouldn't have been seen as someone of high value to be in the inner wall. She would have been on the outer wall with those who were outside the camp, essentially. Of Jericho. So we're going to read from Joshua 2. I'm going to read the whole story. It is quite long, apologies. But we're going to read from Joshua 2. So it's going to come up on the screen, or you can turn to it in your Bibles, entirely up to you. This is from the NIV version. So it says, then Joshua, son of Nun, secretly sent 2 spies from Shittim. Go look over the land, he said, especially Jericho. So they went and entered the house of a prostitute named Rahab and stayed there. The king of Jericho was told, look, some of the Israelites have come here tonight to spy out the land. So the king of Jericho sent this message to Rahab. Bring out the men who come to you and entered your house, because they've come to spy out the whole land. But the woman had taken the 2 men and hidden them. She said, yes, the men came to me, but I didn't know where they'd come from. At dusk, when I knew it was time to close the city gate, when it was time to close the city gate, they left. I don't know which way they went. Go after them quickly, you may catch up with them. But she'd taken them up to the roof and hidden them under the stalks of flax that she'd laid out on the roof. So the men set it out in pursuit of the spies on the road that leads to the fords of Jordan. As soon as the pursuers had gone out, the gate was shut. Before the spies laid down for the night, she went up to the roof and said to them, I know that the Lord has given you this land, and the great fear of you has fallen on us, so that all who live in this country are melting in fear because of you. We've heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea, for when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to Sihon and Og, the 2 kings of the Amorites east of the Jordan, whom you completely destroyed. Bear in mind, this was 40 years before. When we heard of it, our hearts melted in fear, and everyone's courage failed because of you. For the Lord your God is God in heaven above and on the earth below. So she's very aware of God at this stage, and they're not living for God in Jericho. Now then, please swear to me by the Lord that you will show kindness to my family, because I've shown kindness to you. Give me a sure sign that you will spare the lives of my father and mother, my brothers and sisters, and all who belong to them, and that you will save us from death. Our lives for your lives, the men assured her. If you don't tell what we're doing, we will treat you kindly and faithfully when the Lord gives us the land. So she let them down by a rope through the window, for the house she lived in was part of the city wall. She said to them, go to the hills so that your pursuers will not find you. Hide yourselves there for 3 days until they return, and then go on your way. Now the men said to her, the oath you made us swear will not be binding on us, unless when we enter the land, you've tied this scarlet cord in the window through which you let us down. And unless you've brought your father and mother, your brothers and all your family Unless you've brought your father and mother, your brothers, and all your family into your house, if any of them go outside your house into the street, their blood will be on their own heads. We will not be responsible. As for those who are in the house with you, their blood will be on our head if a hand is laid on them. But if I tell you what we are doing, we will be released from the oath that you made us swear. So she sent them away, and they departed, and she tied the scarlet cord in the window. When they left, they went into the hills and stayed there 3 days until the pursuers had searched all along the road and returned back without finding them. The two men stared back. They went down at the hills, forded the river, and came to Joshua, son of Nun, and told him everything that had happened. They said to Joshua, "The Lord has surely given the whole land into our hands. All the people are melting in fear because of us." So we look at that verse, and there's a few things that we can see. We learn straight away, it's very clear, we are introduced to Rahab the prostitute. We're not introduced to this is Rahab. We're introduced to her and her job, which meant that her identity was probably in what she did as a job. She's hidden the spies. The king's men can't find the spies. The spies get all of the information that they need in order to go and report back to Joshua what's going on. Rahab has heard the stories about the Israelite God. So she's heard all what's gone on when Moses was leading the guys out of Egypt. She's heard about the stuff in the Red Sea. It's clear that there's talk around that, which is really interesting, because in today's society, you could hear that in 5 seconds as soon as you turn on the news or Facebook. But this would have been something that had to pass through lots of people to lots of people as a conversation. So there was obviously a big fear there. It's very clear that she's got an element of faith, because she makes a clear statement that she knows who God is. I mean, you wouldn't make that statement and then be like, well, I know who he is, but I don't really believe in him. It's clear that she knows who he is. She asks for her family to be saved from death. So she goes and asks that question. They don't tell her, oh, do you know what? Because you've allowed us to stay here, we'll spare you from death. No, she has to go and make the ask to them. We know that her house was on the city wall. That's where she let them out. She tells them to hide for 3 days. There's a scarlet cord that's put out to show where she was. And in Joshua 6, which we'll come to in a second, they keep to their word. You know, today I want to look at the area of forgiveness, because when we look at this story, there's so much that we could look at. We could look at the significance of the scarlet cord in the window, and how the scarlet cord would have been red. Red represents blood in the Bible, and Jesus came to forgive our sins through the blood that he shed on the cross. We could look at that. We could look at her faithfulness, of the fact that she did the right thing in amongst something where she could have said to the king, bearing in mind she lives in the same area of Jericho. She could have said, oh yeah, they're just over there. She didn't. We could look at that. We could look at lots of different things, the interactions between her and the spies. But I want to look at forgiveness, because the reality is there would have been a huge theme for Rahab that was going on there. She would have had to have forgiven those that made her on the outer wall of society. She would have known that she was lower than low according to everyone else because of what she did. She would have had to have forgiven herself through what she did and find that redemption in God, which would have been a whole journey as well. And she would have had to forgive herself for the job that she chose to do, that she knew was a very difficult job and would have had lots of complexities around it. You know, forgiveness is something for me that I've personally struggled with. I said it at the beginning. And there's some things that crop up in your life and they're a quick forgive. You know, like coming here and someone cuts you up in the traffic, and then you lift up your hands and you're like, you don't do any signs, church, no signs. You lift up your hands and you're like, oh, what was that for? And then you just pray that they don't come to church. No, you lift up your hands and you're like, oh, what was that for? But in an instant, you have to choose to let it go. Otherwise, you could hold on to it. For some people, they could hold on to it and it would ruin their whole day. For me, I really struggle with people chewing loudly. Oh, it drives me insane. If you're sitting at a table, I'm not even going to do it down the microphone because it would jar you and it would jar me. Forgiving people that have hurt me in life. Forgiving people, for me, in my life, in relationships that took advantage of my generous nature. For me, even to the extent of forgiving abusers. And I know that's not going to be everyone's reality, and I'm not saying that's where you need to be at, but that's been a whole journey for me. So I in some respects feel like when we're talking on forgiveness, I'm not talking at you, I'm standing with you, because this is something that I have to come to daily. Often I think we think the people at the front have got everything together and don't have to work through anything, when actually we're just as messed up as anyone else, and we still have to come to that process. So please don't think I'm talking at you. But Rahab's life just reminds me of the forgiveness of God. She just emanates the forgiveness of God. I want to share 3 things that I've seen whilst looking at this, the verses in Joshua. And the first thing is that forgiveness isn't exclusive. So when we look at the Bible, we look time and time again of people that have messed up. It's not just people, it's not just Rahab, it's not just a couple of big names. There are multiple people that messed up, but because of who they were and because of who they did, it didn't exclude them from the love of God. They still were able to have the same access to God. We look at Jacob, he was a cheater. We look at Peter, he had a bad temper. We look at David, he had an affair. We look at Noah, he got drunk. We look at Jonah, he ran from God. We look at Paul, he was a murderer. We look at Miriam, she was a gossip. We look at Thomas, he was a doubter. We look at Martha, she was a worrier. Not that that's like majorly wrong to be a worrier, but there's lots of things in this list that we could keep going and going and going. Moses was a murderer. Solomon was an idol worshipper. There are so many people time and time again, like you and I, that are mentioned as flawed people in the Bible. But because we read the Bible, and sometimes we've fairy taled the Bible, we've made it into a bit of a fairy tale, so we're like, yeah, that's not really us. But you could be sitting there having, I don't know, lied this morning, or lied in your job, or, you're doing something that's not quite right. But because we don't see it as but someone's a murderer here, it's like, oh, yeah, but that's not the same but that's our sin scale that we put into place. And actually, when it comes to God, the scale, it doesn't exist. I do believe with forgiveness, there's a scale. And when I say there's a scale, I believe that the scale is that it's very easy to forgive someone who's cut you up in traffic, but it's completely the other end of a scale to forgive someone that may have taken someone's life. Or do I believe it can happen? Absolutely. But it will take a process from the person that forgives someone for cutting them up to the person that forgives a murderer. It's a very different process, isn't it? But I do believe that everyone can find freedom. Forgiveness isn't exclusive. If I look at pictures back in the day when I was working in the ambulance service, you would not believe the person that's standing in front of you now. If you saw photos, I was going to put some photos up and then I thought, maybe not. If you saw photos, you would see that I was an absolute wreck. I was drinking pretty much every day. I was doing lots and lots of things that were not okay at all. But you wouldn't be able to identify the person I am now to the person I was back then. If you spoke to my colleagues about what I was like and what my mouth was like, you would not be able to put the 2 and 2 together, because it's worlds apart. But it's because of the forgiveness that I've found in Christ that I've been able to forgive myself, I've been able to forgive others, but also I stand before you as a person that's received the grace and the love of God. And I know there's many people that are sitting in this room today that have had exactly the same thing happen, which is a really beautiful thing. Rahab, she changed the whole course of history. So Rahab, if we look in Matthew 1, there's a whole long list of names. And if you ever read the gospel, you probably look at it and you're like, oh, here we go. This person was parent to this person and this person was parent to... And it's a whole long list. But if you look in that list, there's 5 women in that list. There's only 5. The first one is Tamar, who slept with her father-in-law. The second one is Rahab, who was a prostitute. The third one is Ruth, who was actually Rahab's daughter-in-law. A lot of people don't put the correlation between Ruth and Rahab. There's Bathsheba. The poor woman isn't even named. She's just named as Uriah's wife in that genealogy. She had the affair with David. And then you've got Mary, the mother of Jesus, and they are the only women named in that genealogy. But out of all of the women that's named in that genealogy, besides Mary, all of them had some stuff going on. Every single one of them had some stuff going on, but it wasn't exclusive that God was going to take them exactly where they were at, change the course of history, and they could find the freedom and forgiveness. Rahab was also mentioned in the Hebrews Hall of Fame. Hebrews has got like a whole lot of people who are remembered for the things that they did in Hebrews. So Hebrews 11 verse 31 says, "By faith, the prostitute Rahab, because she welcomed the spies, was not killed with those who were disobedient." You know, as I said, you may be sitting there and have different stories across the whole place. There will be people that have very, very different stories. And as I said, forgiveness isn't exclusive. And Romans 8:38-39 tells us that. It says, "For I am convinced that neither death nor life, neither angels nor demons, neither the present nor the future, nor any powers, nor height nor depth, nor anything else in creation will be able to separate us from the love of God." So can I assure you, if you are sitting there this morning and you think, "Oh, God would never forgive me for what I've done," He will. Because my Bible tells me that there is nothing. If death can't separate us from the love of God, then your sin can't separate you from the love of God. There's no way. So can I encourage you, if there is people in here this morning and you're really struggling with some stuff that maybe you've got caught up in, or please come and see one of the leaders. We would love to be able to pray with you and talk to you and process that through with you. But you need to know that forgiveness isn't exclusive for me or anyone else in that room. In this room, it stands for you too. The second thing is that forgiveness is a journey. Anyone been on one of those journeys that you just think, "Oh my goodness me, what is this?" No, just me? Okay. Well, so basically, we, about 7 years ago, we went to China, went to Beijing, and got stuck in an airport in Beijing for like 48 hours. Yeah. It was just before COVID. Not going to say much more there, but they were already separating 3 meters. They were already doing temperature checks. They were all doing lots there, so I'm not going to say anything. So it was just before COVID had come out here, but Beijing were already en route to doing all of these things. And me and Hannah had got a connecting flight, so we were meant to be going to Hong Kong, but going through Beijing first. And the flight had got delayed. The board wasn't put up of when the next flight was going out. So we're just living our best lives in Pizza Hut in Beijing, as you do, eating pizza. And then all of a sudden, I said to Han, "We've been here a long time. There's no mention of any flights. There literally is nothing." So we went to the person in the airport, and there was like barely anyone around. And she was like, "Yeah, it's long gone." She didn't say that, but I was like, "Oh, so what do we do?" We was like, "Surely there's one in a couple of hours." Or she was like, no, it's in, I think it was 36 hours time or something stupid, or no, 48 hours or something silly. So we were like, right. And then she proceeds to pull us through like this security back end offices. Me and Hannah were looking at each other like, what on earth is going on? Are we about to, end up in a Chinese prison somewhere? Like, what the heck? It just didn't feel right. Nothing about it felt right. Apart from the fact that she pulled us round to this place and said, "You're going to have to stay here to get your flight." And we were like, but there was no notifications. There was nothing. And then we realised we would have missed the flight anyway because the flight was delayed. The other flight was delayed. So she said, "It's okay. We can give you a food voucher for £5. I mean, most of you will know that in an airport, £5 will probably get you a bottle of water. So we were like, right, okay. So we're sitting in this airport, and there is, if you look further enough down on my Facebook, there is a diary vlog entry. We've been 10 hours in the airport so far, just sitting on chairs. Literally, it was like the weirdest thing. I hadn't got any clothes. My clothes had gone onto the plane with the big suitcase. So I'm sitting there miserable. I'm a bigger woman in China. Calvin Klein even, like their biggest size is probably like a size 10. So I'm like, great, wonderful. I'm just sitting in the same clothes. There was hardly anything open. And we knew we were heading to Hong Kong. We knew we had all of this stuff planned, but actually our journey got thwarted, stopped in our tracks. And just as we thought we were getting somewhere, we really wasn't. And it ended up like we were sleeping on these benches with like our arms through our suitcase, just in case someone come along and stole them. It was just a long, long, long experience, but it wasn't straightforward. There was nothing about it that was straightforward. And Rahab, you could think the same with Rahab, that her story has just stopped. She just arrived in Joshua 2, but she hasn't. We flick over to Joshua 6 and we find out that the story continues because the Israelites have marched round the walls of Jericho and the walls have fallen, and there's instructions just before them on what is happening. So Joshua 6 verse 22, it says this: Joshua said to the two men who had spied out the land, the walls have fallen, bear in mind, go into the prostitute's house and bring her out and all who belong to her in accordance with your oath to her. So the young men who had done the spying went in and brought out Rahab, her father, her mother, her brothers, her sisters, and all who had belonged to her. They brought out her entire family and put them in a place outside the camp of Israel. Then they burned the whole city and everything in it. But they put the silver and gold and the articles of bronze and iron into the treasury of the Lord's house. But Joshua spared Rahab the prostitute with her family and all who belonged to her, because she hid the men Joshua had sent as spies to Jericho, and she lives among the Israelites to this day. I look at that and I look at the fact that Rahab had obviously come to a place where she'd accepted God in some sort of form. She's got to leave behind everything that she knows. So if we go back to the city, she would have known the city, or Jericho. She would have known all of that like the back of her hand. That was where she lived. That was where she got treated, probably not so good because of her job. It's interesting that Joshua has sent spies and they've ended up in the prostitute's house. She obviously knew how to hide people well. So she's got a reputation in this place. They could have gone to her father, because it says that her father and her brothers and her sister and her mother, they could have gone elsewhere, but they didn't. They went to Joshua. So she knows all of this to be life, and all of this has been burnt down. All of this has been completely destroyed. The walls have fallen. According to archaeologists, it would have been both sets of walls that fell. So she's accepted God. She's left behind everything that she knows. She's got a fresh start. And then we read, they brought out her entire family and put them in a place outside the camp of Israel. So yet again, she has gone from the outer wall to being camped with the Israelites. They've kept their promise. And she's on the outer wall of the camp because of who she was and because of her job. So she finds herself in this place again where she's just been. The outside of the camp was for those that were for the Israelites when they were camping, was for those that were ceremonially unclean. It was for those that there wasn't like prisons and that sort of stuff. It was for those that had committed crime. It was for those that would have potentially been physically unwell, leprosy. It would have been those that were potentially mentally unwell. It would have been for those who had committed serious sin. It would have been those for people who didn't meet the mark. That was the outside camp. Those that had a reputation. So she's been put in the outside camp. It's all Old Testament. Bear in mind, this is all Old Testament. Now, in the New Testament, we meet Jesus. Jesus came and bridged the gap between the outside camp and the inside camp. Anyone who believed in Jesus could have access to God. When Jesus died on the cross, it was hugely significant because Jesus died on the cross outside of the city walls, with those that hung on the cross that were criminals. So we've already got a representation that we see in Rahab, and we're seeing it being mirrored further down in the New Testament. He hung on the cross to bridge the gap from those that were inside to those that were outside. And that's why forgiveness isn't exclusive for you or I. See, although she belonged outside the camp, at some point along the journey she meets an Israelite man. How, we don't know, because it wouldn't have been heard of really. When she was seen as unclean, it kind of made no sense, but we're told that she then moves and she lives with the Israelites. We're told that she goes with the Israelites. And it would have been a picture of what happened when Jesus came, because then we find out that she ends up having a son with her husband called Salmon. She has a son called Boaz, and then Boaz, and then Ruth, and then as we go. I imagine as she left all of that behind and started a new life and become an outsider again in her new life, there would have been a lot of forgiveness that had to take place for those that were knowing what she did, for those that treated her a certain way, for herself, for those around her. I imagine she would have had to have come to this place yet again of forgiveness. The journey started so well, and you think that we're continuously moving, but we're stopped again at the same place. And it's the same as life. Our journeys are not always straightforward. There are hiccups along the way. You will feel like you've taken 10,000 steps forward and 500 steps back in the area of forgiveness. And sometimes you've just got to stand still, and you've just got to know, like in Psalm 46:10, it says, "Be still and know that I am God." Sometimes you have to be still and stop trying to force the journey and stop trying to move forward when God just wants you to sit with him, put it at his feet, and be still before him. She had to trust God. You know, the third thing that I notice is that forgiveness brings about freedom. But she had to ask, like I said earlier, she had to ask for what she wanted. She didn't just get given the fact that her and her family were going to survive. She had to physically ask and say, well, if I do this for you, can you do this for me? It says in verse 12, "Now then, please swear to me by the Lord that you will show kindness to my family because I've shown kindness to you. Give me a sure sign that you will spare the lives of my father and mother, my brothers and sisters, and all who belong to them, and that you will save us from death." I can't imagine, from the role that she had in society, being on the outside of camp, she was someone that brought bargains about to anyone in authority. I can't imagine that was her. I can't imagine that she was able to do that and have that much authority to say, well, if I help you, you help me. I can't imagine for 1 minute. But we all have to play a part in making sure forgiveness happens. We all have to. Have you ever woken up in the middle of the night to cats outside your window and all you can hear is, and it goes on for ages and ages and ages? At some point, one cat has to back down. Sometimes you hear the scrap and you imagine the feathers and fur. Sorry if you're a cat lover, sorry. But someone has to back down. And this is something that I've struggled with, because there's been times where I've not wanted to back down. If someone's hurt me and they've wronged me, I don't want to back down because it hurts and it shouldn't have been done, or someone shouldn't have acted that way. But you have to take your part in it too. You have to take your part in it too. And sometimes that part can look like just holding on to something for too long. Not necessarily that you did anything wrong, but sometimes what it's done to you ends up being what is toxic. Life's too short to be holding on to things that are not important. You don't want to regret anything. As I say, I'm not saying that if anyone has had something major happen to them, I'm not saying that you should forgive and forget. That was the old saying, wasn't it? Forgiveness doesn't mean to say that you forget. It means to say that the power of what happens to you and how you internalize it is given to God. But you'll still remember. I think in this room, there's probably a few different types of people, but I think there's some people that probably have unforgiveness towards others. And maybe it's minor, maybe it's major, I don't know, that you need to put right. And I think there's some people in this room that physically can't, for whatever reason, go and put stuff right. But you need to give it to God so that he can replace the pain with some comfort in your life, or replace the pain to make it not as raw with some peace, or to replace the feelings and the thoughts with good thoughts. It was a church in Munich that I saw him, a balding, heavy-set man in a grey overcoat, a brown felt hat clutched between his hands. People were filing out of the basement room where I'd just spoken, moving along the rows of wooden chairs to the door at the rear. It was 1947, and I'd come from Holland to defeated Germany with the message that God forgives. It was the truth that they needed most to hear in that bitter, bombed-out land, and I gave them my favourite mental picture. Maybe because the sea is never far from a Hollander's mind, I like to think that's where forgiven sins were thrown. When we confess our sins, I said, God cast them into the deepest ocean, gone forever. The solemn faces stared back at me, not quite daring to believe. There were never questions after a talk in Germany in 1947. People stood up in silence. In silence, they collected their wraps. In silence, they left the room. And that's when I saw him, working his way forward amongst the others. The moment I saw the overcoat and the brown hat, the next a blue uniform and a visored cap with its skull and crossbones. It came with a rush. The huge room with its harsh overhead lights, the pathetic pile of dresses and shoes in the centre of the floor, the shame of walking naked past this man. I could see my sister's Frau form ahead of me, ribs sharp beneath the parchment skin. Betsy, how thin you were. Betsy and I had been arrested for concealing Jews in our home during the Nazi occupation of Holland. This man had been a guard at Ravensbrück concentration camp where we were sent. Now he was in front of me, hand thrust out, a fine message. Fraulein, how good it is to know that, as you say, all of our sins are at the bottom of the sea. And I, who had spoken so glibly of forgiveness, fumbled in my pocketbook rather than take out a hand. He would not remember me, of course. How could he remember one prisoner among the thousands of women? But I remembered him and the leather crop swinging from his belt. It was the first time since my release that I'd been face to face with one of my captors, and my blood seemed to freeze. You mentioned Ravensbrück in your talk, he was saying. I was a guard in there. No, he didn't remember me. But since that time, he went on, I've become a Christian. I knew that God has forgiven me for the cruel things that I did there, but I'd like to hear it again from your lips as well. Fraulein, again, the hand comes out. Will you forgive me? As I stood there, whose sins every day had to be forgiven, I couldn't. Betsy had died in that place. How could he erase her slow, terrible death simply by asking? It couldn't have been many seconds that he stood there, hand held out, but to me it seemed hours as I wrestled with the most difficult thing I ever had to do, for I had to do it. I knew that. The message that God forgives has a prior condition, that if we forgive those who have injured us, if we don't forgive their trespasses, Jesus says, neither then your Father in heaven will forgive you of your trespasses. I knew not only as a commandment of God, but as a daily experience since the end of the war I had home in Holland for victims of Nazi brutality. Those were able to forgive the former enemies, were able to return to the outside world and rebuild their lives, no matter what the physical scars were. Those who had nursed their bitterness remained invalids. It was as simple and as horrible as that. And still, as I stood there with the coldness clutching my heart, but forgiveness not an emotion, I knew that I had to. Forgiveness isn't an act of the will, and that will can function regardless of the temperature of heart. Jesus, help me, I prayed silently. I can lift my hand, I can do that much, but you've got to supply the feeling. And so woodenly, mechanically, I thrust my hand into the one stretched out in front of me. And as I did, an incredible thing took place. The current started in my shoulder, raced down my arm, sprang into our joined hands, and then this healing warmth seemed to flood my whole being, bringing tears to my eyes. I forgive you, brother, I cried, with all of my heart. For a long moment we grasped each other's hands, the former guard and the former prisoner. I had never known God's love so intensely as I did then. She then went on to say, can I have the band up, please? She then went on to say that she, as an 80-year-old woman, had to come to this place where forgiveness was something that she had to come to time and time again. And she used an illustration of when a friend had upset her, and it was keeping her up during the night, and some nasty things had been said, and she just couldn't sleep. And she asked God for help, and nothing happened. And then she asked God for help, and then this preacher came to her and basically gave her an illustration. They were in a church, and there was a big bell that you pull. And the preacher basically said, for as long as you've got the hand on the rope, the sound will keep going. As long as you hold on to it, and as long as you keep seeing your part in it, the sound will keep going. But the minute you let your hand off the rope, the sound will keep going, and it will be a journey that you have to work towards, and it will be a journey that you have to work through. And we know that, but eventually the sound will stop. The bell will stop. When I was driving here this morning, I was thinking of what I could say to kind of end off. And I was thinking about when you fall over, when you're younger and you fall over, well, maybe not when you're younger, it depends if you're a common faller overer. But when you fall over and you get a bad graze, and you get stones in that graze, and you get nasty bits and pieces, and you get dirt, and it's so painful to get out the bits of that graze and the stone. It hurts so much. It's the last thing you want to do, but you know that if you don't pull that stuff out, it will only impact you and your body in a really bad way, and could end up septic, and could end up poisoning you. But with a little bit of gentleness and a little bit of cleaning and a little bit of soaking and a little bit of coming back through and a little bit of scabbing, eventually it doesn't go away, but it scars. And when it scars, what was there is still there. You've not forgotten it, but it doesn't cause you the harm that it would have caused you if you hadn't have tried to clean it out. And this morning, as I was praying and I was looking at Rahab and I was looking at what we could have said, and I was looking at, there's so many things that I could say. I look at that woman and just think, wow, the forgiveness time and time and time again that she would have had to have seen or shown or been involved in would have been wild. And I wonder this morning, if you're there thinking about your exclusivity, that you don't deserve it, like I said earlier. I wonder if you're thinking of those that have wronged you, the minor things, the major things, the big things, the ugly things. I wonder this morning if we could stand. And I wonder if we could sing this song, we're talking about day and night, night and day, let incense arise. And incense is a beautiful smelling aroma that we offer up to God. And sometimes unforgiveness is not a beautiful smelling aroma, but we've still got to offer it up to God. Because what happens when we offer it up to God is the replacement of what was becomes something that's beautiful. The replacement of what set out to mess us up and tear us down becomes something that becomes a message that's a beautiful thing. So I wonder if we could all sing. And I wonder if when we're singing this song, you could think about the things that you need to offer up to God, just you and God. I'm not going to call people out in the area of unforgiveness. I wonder if this week you can start your journey and you will stop along the way and you will come to places where you're tired and you will come to places where you're like, I can't do this anymore, and you will come to places where it hurts, and you will come to places where there's things that come back, but you have ownership on that. So I wonder this morning as we sing together if you could offer up some things to King Jesus to set you free.